Today we get to peel back the curtain that is MLB scouting and what it's like to find the next star.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Reds, and my name is Jeff Carr. My co-host Steve Offenbaker will be alongside me here shortly, and today we are joined by current Reds scout Tyler Gibbons. He was gracious enough to give us lots of time. We've got a great conversation for you, really diving into the nuts and bolts of what the process is behind scouting the next star for the Cincinnati Reds. Tyler is going to peel back the curtain when it comes to what he does. He's an amateur scout. He'll get into that a little bit more. And we'll talk about, player evaluation. How does a scout evaluate a player? But I love how we begin the conversation because we talk a little Moneyball. How true was that movie to what real life looks like? That's all coming up on today's Locked On Reds podcast that is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $150 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. Go to FanDuel.com to get started today, and very excited for this conversation here, so we'll get started with Tyler Gibbons. All right, we are really pleased to be joined by Tyler Gibbons here today. He is a current scout for the Cincinnati Reds, and really wanted to have just a scouting discussion because I feel like it is referenced just about every day. I mean, if you're going to the game, if you're watching the game on TV, listening to the game, scouting comes up eventually in some capacity, and I feel like a lot of casual baseball fans kind of just nod along and they're like, don't really know what that means though. So we want to get that out. We want to talk about that here on today's show, and I'm very glad, Tyler, to have you along with us, man. How you doing?
I'm good. I appreciate you both having me on. Listen to the podcast, especially when I'm driving to games and stuff like that. So fun to be on this side of it.
Well, we're glad to have you here. And I think that, I think Jeff nailed it in that, probably the average baseball fan or the casual baseball fan, their knowledge of scouting consists of Clint Eastwood having trouble with a curve and, Brad Pitt driving around California trying to resurrect the A's. That's their idea, right, of what a scout situation looks like.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if it was as easy as finding the peanut vendor that could really spin a breaking ball, our life should be a whole lot less travel. But it's the movies themselves they're entertaining, but it is very funny at times. But, it's interesting to see the movies around the scout life. It's kind of cool to see it acknowledged from time to time.
Have you ever, and I kind of wanted to start with this because I've always been curious, has there ever been a moment like that in Moneyball where you're sitting at a table and somebody is just throwing it back at you whenever you're just like, yeah, I think this kid's going to be really good, and they're like, you don't know. Has that ever happened to you?
It's actually typically it's for us, it's almost the other way of a lot of people that really, maybe you're a UC fan or UK or, some of these schools that you have some real dedicated fans, which we love. And maybe they, are one of the players on the team that has had a good year, but then you start lining them up towards everybody else in the country. And it's like, oh, this guy's the best player, this. And it's like, well, the LSU pitching staff would probably say something different if they had to go pitch against him or something along those lines. It's such a big country, and once you start going into the colleges and the high school, I totally get, saying so-and-so is a really, really good player. But when you start doing the big view of it all, it's like, well, especially once you get into pro ball, it's a whole different animal. But every now and then, you can get into some good debates, but it really, up until they get into the big leagues, it doesn't really matter once you get there.
Well, let's kind of drill down a little bit on your area. Let's kind of set the table so that as this conversation plays out, folks know what we're talking about. So when we say you're a scout for the Reds, what does that mean?
So I am on the amateur side. So there's the amateur side, there's the professional side. We have an international department. So there's so much in terms of a scouting, side of the organization that everything's covered in one way or another. So I'm on the amateur side. So I have high school and college for the draft, and I cover Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Kentucky, and West Virginia. So the colleges and high school kids in those states are mine and known. I'm, the first guy typically getting in contact with them or seeing those guys before I let the guy above me know, who then keeps going up and up and up until hopefully, if it's somebody that we really like, then everybody in the department that needs to see him for the draft to feel confident in picking him, hopefully has seen him, and, you go from there.
That sounds like a huge area that for one guy to cover.
Ohio's big enough.
How do you do that?
It's a lot of driving. We were laughing. We were going back and forth with one of our assistant scouting director, Paul Pearson. We're trying to figure out when we get our new company car. I'll be going into I guess this will be 2 going into year 3 with the company car, and I just got over 100,000 miles. So it's a lot of driving, but
it's a Cybertruck, right?
Cybertruck, Avalon, you get it mixed up all the time. But they really, it's kind of a backwards situation, but really how your spring is attacked is from the fall. So in the fall, you have the scout days, and the coaches do a really good job in our area where the Ohio schools will go 1 week, then the Michigan schools, then the Indiana, Kentucky, West Virginia, whatever order it is. But you go to all those scout days and you essentially create your prep list to where, when the fall is done, who's my best player, and you work your way down. And then once the spring starts, just look at that prep list and you try to go down it as well as you can. Now, the beginning of the year, because you guys, being in Cincinnati, being the weather here come February is miserable. So right. Most of the teams in my area go south. So, I try to start with the top guy on my list, but, this past year, Coastal Carolina had 2 of my teams down there. So it's like, all right, quantity, I can knock out some good quality guys as well, but I can get more in one spot. So you just kind of attack it that way.
And that's pretty good too, Coastal Carolina. I mean, you get to go down to Myrtle Beach, so you're just chilling on the beach, and all the guy. And
Jeff's a big fan of Carolinas.
Oh, the talent in the Carolinas is crazy. But no, in the beginning of the year is always fun from our perspective too, because it's a lot of teams that once everybody comes back, you don't leave your area a whole lot, so. You'll get some cross coverage in terms of, let's say, with UC changing conferences now, Oklahoma came last year, so I can lay my eyes on some of the Oklahoma guys. But at the beginning of the year, because it's straight out the chute, everybody is communicating from top guy to bottom guy of, hey, if Coastal Carolina, for example, here are the 5 guys I have at Coastal. When you're watching your guys, take a look at my guys, and we can communicate to see if we're all on the same page, or if so-and-so has gotten better or worse. So you at least get the ball rolling for not only yourself, but for others. And the communication's key.
Jeff's probably going to mute my mic here in a minute because I keep asking all the questions, but I find this stuff really, really interesting. You talk about your list and the top guy on your list. How does the list get created nowadays? We kind of know how it all worked in the past, but, in this day and age of social media and video and, high school streaming all of their games, some of the bigger schools, you can just jump on your computer and watch some, 5A school in Texas play baseball if you really want to. What does that look like for you? Where does the list come from? Who's creating the list? Like, walk me through that process of what's the starting point look like?
So really, for the prep list, we'll throughout the entire summer and fall, we'll run into guys in our own area and outside our own area. So we'll put in a bunch of follows, which is essentially a short report just to kind of identify who the player is. And that way they don't get lost in the shuffle of all the players we see throughout the summer. But when it comes to the prep list, really you just narrow that down to your own area because it's already hard enough to do your own area on top of everybody else. So you just focus on your own. And then you start thinking about all these different ways that you see players, whether it's in the spring and they're not eligible and you've write a follow. So it's like, hey, once this guy's ready to go next year, I am already prepared to talk about him. And then in the summer, there's so many different summer events, whether it is the Cape, Northwoods League, the Draft League now. And then you look at the summer events, there's East Coast Pro, which is one of the biggest high school events in the country that I'm on the coaching staff for. So I'm in the dugout with a lot of these players to get to know who they are. Area codes, the AFLAC games, Jupiter. I mean, there's so many different events over the summer that you can see these high school kids and the college guys, but you can see the high school kids, which is great because the more looks you get at guys, the better. And you don't always want them to be great. You want to see how they're able to bounce back from a start that maybe isn't their best, and then see how they do when it's, at their best. Do they act the same way? Like, it's just all piecing together different, puzzle pieces. And that way, when it comes to the spring, you have an idea of what a good day can look like, what a bad day can look like.
The Reds are already narrowing down who they want to draft as we speak for this next upcoming draft. We'll tell you what the process looks like coming up next. Love the holidays, but hate grocery shopping for them? Ibotta is making your Thanksgiving easier with cash back on everything you need to make your perfect holiday meal. So you can get the turkey and your favorite sides, all the trimmings, and all the extras for free. Seriously. This month, Ibotta is giving new users 100% cash back on your Thanksgiving feast. All you need to do is use the code LOCKEDONMLB in the app. There's so many great offers, and you just add those offers in the app and redeem them on everything that you need to make your Thanksgiving feast complete. Download the Ibotta app now and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get 100% cash back on your Thanksgiving feast starting November 1st. We're already past that point. You can get 100% cash back on your Thanksgiving feast on Ibotta right now. Just download the app on the Google Play or the App Store and use that code LOCKEDONMLB. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store, and use that code LOCKEDONMLB. You can tackle the NFL action over on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything that you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, and you could check out all the latest stats, the view, the live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And while you're there, you can also check out some baseball action like, futures, next year's World Series odds. The value right now on the Reds will never be better. 60-1 currently to win the 2025 World Series. Terry Francona says, hold my beer. Just saying. Might be good to get in now before the Reds shopping spree begins. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
And then once all that's done, like where we're at right now in the season is we're starting to do player meetings. So I'll meet with however many colleges of those guys that are on that pref list and go over the makeup stuff. And there'll be some guys that completely blow you out of the water with how good they are and, mentally sharp, or just one of those guys that you're like, hey, I fully have confidence in this kid. He can go up your prep list. Or there can be some guys that can be really talented, but like not the greatest of answers, or he just doesn't seem motivated. You can kind of knock him down a few tiers. So we know going into a year, the year is they got to go and perform, got to go play well. Sometimes they have down years and you put everything in the history together, but obviously going out and doing it's key. But going into the year, I mean, everybody we really harp on it. You want to be as ready to go once that first game of the season starts. And that even includes us, before the year starts, when those guys are doing their indoor practices or bullpens, we're in there watching those guys ahead of time. Even if it's at 80%, we're in there just to get eyes on them to see if, the weightlifting has made an impact or whatever, you might go in there to notice.
So is it a situation where you're looking at your list and you're like, all right, Monday we're going here, Tuesday we're going here. Do you just kind of swoop in like Batman, watch the game, and then get out of there? Or is it something where you're talking to guys? Because in the back of my mind when I played high school baseball, I was like, man, I wonder if there's anybody out there watching me. But nobody really cared about my sunflower seed selection, so nobody was trying to scout that. But is it something where you're talking to players on a regular basis?
So if anything, we'll talk to coaches. We'll figure out the pitching rotations, especially with the high school kids. They tend to throw Monday through Thursday, then the college guys Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And that can change depending on, if a midweek game or something like that. But really, yeah, we have a scheduling system in which you can put on there what game you're going to, and it has all the high schools and the colleges, so that way anybody in the organization can see where we're all going. And you can plan out for as far as you want. We know it's going to rain, so that'll blow it up. There's the different injuries. Unfortunately, that's a part of it all. And sometimes it happens every year. There's pop-up guys where all of a sudden you're a couple weeks in, and so at one high school that nobody knew about is now coming out throwing 94, 95. So you scrap your plan for that day and you go and see them. So you can plan out as much as you can, so that way everybody's communicating, but you can only plan so far, because you can go ahead and already chalk up that whatever schedule you have is not most likely going to happen.
Well, let's talk about the next part of the process then. So you get your list, you go out, you get eyes on these guys, you're writing your reports. And you mentioned this just a little bit of, trying to get everybody that needs to see a kid before the draft process really plays out. So tell me about that. Is it you reporting to your direct boss? Are there times where the entire brain trust is in a room hearing about things? I mean, how high up does the group go that would get together to talk about these players before the draft? Is Nick Kroll in that room? Is Brad Mader in that room? What does that look like?
So I guess we'll start during the I try not to go too long, regular season, and as it goes on later in the year, it kind of changes. But we have a weekly Zoom call. The East does. We have, I guess, the group of my area down to the Carolinas, and then up the East Coast is the East, is how we break it down as a region. So we have a cross-checker, Bill Bykowski. He looks over the 4 area guys in his region. So we do Zoom calls every week to go over what we saw, what happened over the weekend, because the cross-checkers, the national guys that are above the cross-checkers, and then our assistant scouting director and our scouting director all have a Zoom call during the week. So we, as area guys, talk, we give our cross-checker the info, and then he continues to pass it on. So that's always good. That way everybody's on the same page, but also the area guys start to kind of learn what's going on in other guys' areas. So then if there is some crossover, for you name it, but what if a Big Ten school comes in and I see Ohio State, I kind of have an idea of what the other team might have, which is good. So, we talk about that, but, let's just, I had Weatherholt last year. So I go and see JJ, kind of tell my cross-checker about it, but JJ was already very well known. So, it's not surprising. But I see him, then my cross-checker can go in and see him and say, hey, at that point, like JJ looked healthy because he had the hamstring injury. Then once my cross-checker saw him, that's great. Then the national guys can go in there, or my director can go in. It's kind of like a step-by-step process. JJ's a little different. My director could have started off there. We knew how high a priority it is, but you usually go that way to make sure, hey, he's healthy, everything looks good. So that way, whoever goes in and sees him knows he's at hopefully his best. And then by the end of the year, if it's a game at UC, like when Weatherholt in West Virginia came to UC, Brad could go, Nick could go, Jeff Grappe could go, any of those office, guys that are in the office at the stadium, any of those local ones they can get out to, which is great. But before the draft happens, we get into we all go to the stadium and we sit down in a room with Joe, Jeff, Nick, Brad, the whole group, my cross checker, and I sit down in the war room and we go over guy 1 through the last person I turn in as a report, and we go down and talk about every single person before the draft. So there's no name that could pop up that anybody could be surprised about.
Is there a situation where, especially when you're going through this draft process, that you have ever had a prospect that you've almost tried to sell somebody on, or is it just like, this is what he does, this is his grading and all this other stuff? Like, has there ever been a guy that you were just like, no, we gotta get this guy?
There's some times that it's panned out. I fought hard for Sam Ben-Scooter after the draft that is up there with AAA. I think he just made the Premier 18 Team USA, which is pretty cool. And that was after the draft. And this past year, and all the credit goes to the guys in the draft room that, as a lot of people know, with MLB draft, it's a little different than other sports draft because it's not just pick the best player. You have to balance the money and the lot pool, and it's a whole other thing that I know for a fact I could not do. Too many numbers being thrown around. But this past draft, I was very lucky and excited that we were able to get Luke Hayden from Indiana State. I've known Luke from high school. He's always had a good arm. I think he's a really talented kid. And I think I ignored my cross checker enough with text messages during the draft of like, hey, he's still there, that it panned out. And I think Luke had a good little short stint there before the year ended up. But those guys, the whole country, like I said earlier, is so filled with talent that I don't do it very often, because all you have to do is watch a couple of the cross coverage games and realize, like, yeah, every one of these teams has a kid that I'd be pretty happy that the Reds took in the draft.
Analytics play a part in the scouting equation, but it's not the meat and potatoes that a lot of people like to make it out to believe. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of high net worth for any net worth individual. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC.
Let's drill down just a little bit more on that actual player evaluation. My buddy Chris Welsh, he's been a really good friend to me, and he's been a friend to the show. I interviewed him one time, and we were talking about the Reds and the philosophy changes that have happened over the last several years, where the team moved heavy into analytics. You mentioned this a little while we were getting warmed up. They went and hired Kyle Bodie. They kind of went all in on analytics. And then the way Chris described it was it became pretty evident pretty quick that there needed to be a little bit of a course correction back to he would call it baseball people, back to the baseball people, back to the gut and eye evaluations, back to those things. So I feel like the Reds are in a place now of a happy medium. They're using the analytics, they're using the tools that are available to them. However, that's not the be all end all. So right. When you go out to this game and you're watching, and you can use a real player if you want for this, or you can use a fictitious player, but you go out to a game. How is the evaluation happening? What are you doing? What are you looking at? How are you recording it? How are you reporting it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, we can go into both a pitcher and a position player, but let's talk about pitchers, but talk about analytics and whatnot. There are, you want a guy that can do the ability to, the analytics side, that you hope that they can really spin the ball. If you're talking about fastballs up, you're hoping that they can spin it well enough that they can get the ride. Or if you're going the other way with the sinker, like I have a spin rate radar gun. So when I'm behind home plate, I can get the different velo and the spin rates, which is, again, is it helpful? Yes, but it's not like it dictates like all of a sudden the guy has a really high spin curveball. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's all of a sudden this elite pitch if every time he throws it, it gets hammered. And there's times where guys that can have a good breaking ball with low spin rates where it's like, okay, it's good right now. And if we can help them with some pitch design, or, maybe it's a little fix of the fingers or grip or whatever it may be, that if we can improve that, maybe you're thinking now that pitch could be even better. Something along those lines, but just the ability to purely pitch, I think, like you said, Steve, like coming full circle of coming back, like, yes, having the analytics to some of those pitches is great, but at the end of the day, you got to go out and get outs, and you have to be able to hit spots. And, I love him to death. He will go down as I'll ride and die with the roller coaster. My first MLB player that I drafted was Joe Boyle, and Big Joe throws it as hard as anybody I've ever seen. He has some of the best pure stuff I've ever seen, and when it's on, it's almost unhittable. But then you got to be able to go out there and throw strikes, and I know Joe's been working on that, and I'm rooting for him. But it's one of those that you can have all the stuff, but you got to be able to go out there, command it, throw strikes, get outs, move, pass the baton on to say, or even if you're a starter, be able to go out there and give your team some innings. Some guys can go out there and train indoors in the off season and do your 50-yard sprint and chuck it into a net. And then all of a sudden, you can't go 3 innings. You got to be able to adjust to that. So, that's the pitching side. You're grading every pitch, you're grading the command and control. And then on the position player side, you're talking about the tools. Can he hit? Can he throw? Can he run? Does he hit for power? Can he play defense? You're looking at those kind of things, and you typically, especially with the position player, you're not getting that guy for just one game. You're hopefully getting him for a series, or if you catch those guys in the midweeks. I want to say I saw JJ maybe 10 games last year. So, it's no lack of run times and grades and that kind of stuff. I mean, you've seen these guys so much, you're not really worried about anything popping out that's new for you.
To add a little bit of context to what you were talking about with Joe Boyle, if any Reds fan forgets who Joe Boyle was, he came up through the system, traded to the A's for Sam Maul. Last year, which game is it? He was pitching against Milwaukee in August. He threw 5 innings. He had 8 strikeouts, 4 walks, 5 hits. And I remember that in Dayton too. He was the kind of guy that he would strike out the side, but the bases would be loaded too, just because his stuff was fantastic and you couldn't hit it. But he also didn't quite have the best command over it either. So that's kind of an interesting point. And I've heard this about at least the Reds draft strategy and their minor league strategy when you're scouting. Is there a strategy in mind, or is it just, this guy looks good, let's figure out who he is, and I hand them the profile more so than I am scouting for a specific thing? Because I have heard that at least when the Reds look at drafting pitchers, they draft stuff over command because they believe they can teach the command.
Yeah, I would say, there's that fine line. Now, Joe was maybe a unique one because of the COVID draft. Who knows where Joe goes if it's not a COVID draft? He gets drafted. I mean, and, Joe is also a very unique one because if you look back in college, Joe was throwing I saw Joe throw 100 as a freshman, and he threw 1 inning for Notre Dame. And then I think if you look at his college career now, I don't have it in front of me. I don't know if he threw 40 innings in college. They just never gave him a shot. So you're kind of looking at it like, yes, he has all of these tools, and yes, the command and control has a ways to go. But you're looking at a guy that's thrown hardly ever. Like, what if you just give him the ball and let him go? So we saw him in the Cape that summer before COVID, and they for Harwich, and they actually threw him every 5 days. And the command and control got way better. So, to where it is now, but at the time you would see Joe in college and he'd get the ball once every 3 weeks. It's like, well, it's never going to help anybody. But for today's age and our draft strategy, it's a combination of both. I think it depends on if you're talking about a starter or a reliever. You always want stuff. You do, but it's incredible today. Everybody throws hard. Everybody, no matter where you're at, guys are throwing 95, 96. And, if they're walking too many guys, it's only going to get tougher in pro ball. And the other half of it all is that if you're throwing 95, 96, but it's right down the middle, these hitters have gotten so used to it. We're watching high school kids turn on 95, 96 now. So, there's a lot to it. It's a whole picture thing. I don't know if it necessarily strays us away from anybody if it's a big stuff, but no command or control. But I feel like the pendulum is swinging more back to this kid can really get outs. He can really throw strikes. He competes, and, maybe with some help with strength and conditioning and nutrition and, the more we can help on the PD side, the stuff is coming, if that makes sense.
You have a really great memory. Joe Boyle, 3 seasons of college baseball total of 36 innings in those
close.
3
I'll
seasons.
take that.
You were right on it. I have one last question for you regarding I guess organizational philosophy, and if you can't speak to it or this is not a correct statement, but please let me know. But there's been a I guess impression out there over the last couple drafts with the Reds that the idea with the Cincinnati Reds now and moving forward is to draft and develop the pitching, be more focused on the pitching because it's easier to go out and get position players. It's easier to go out and get hitters. Is there any truth to that as from where you're sitting, or are you just looking for the best players you can find regardless of where they're playing?
For us on our end, you're just looking for the best player. You're thinking to yourself, whether you're pick one or whether you're an after the draft guy, we're hoping that if, one of us really likes you or we've seen you, that you can make an impact in the organization, no matter your position. I'm not speaking for anybody. I'm sure it's a lot easier to tell a position player in free agency, come and hit a Great American, because it's way smaller. And I'm sure that's a tough sell at times for pitchers. But I truly think that when you're looking at the MLB draft and how, it's not like it's a plug and play, like the Bengals taking Burrow and it's like, hey, by the way, you're now our starting quarterback. Good luck. It's, you got to go through the minor league system. So it's not necessarily you're drafting to fix holes currently.
Really appreciate Tyler giving us some time. He's got a great, and we're going to dive in a little bit more into what the scouting scale looks like, the whole 20 to 80 scale. I know everydayers will know that we've talked about that before, and I love Tyler's answer about this, but we really kind of dive into a great discussion about that. That's going to be coming up on Monday's podcast, as well as a discussion about will Nick Martinez actually accept the qualifying offer. John Heyman from the New York Post reports that he is expected to. It has not happened yet, but he is expected to. So what's that going to look like for the Reds? Could that actually be a good sign? There's lots to unpack. We'll do that coming up on Monday's show. Make sure you check out the next Locked On Reds podcast. The best way to make sure that you don't miss any Locked On Reds podcast is to subscribe, because we're going to be with you all throughout the off season. And also make sure you follow us on the different social medias. We're on TikTok. We're on, you can follow me on TikTok at Jeff Carr with 3 Fs. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeff Carr with 3 Fs. You can follow the show at Locked On Reds. There's a Locked On Reds Instagram account. I'm on Instagram as well. It's backwards, Carr, Jeff with 3 Fs, but it's Carr first. And anyway, social media abounds. And there's the Discord page. I got a link to that in the description of today's episode. And speaking of links in the description, check out the link to Locked On MLB and make Sully your second listen of the day, as he's going to regale you of times past and somehow weave that into the present and with a look toward the future, because Locked On MLB has you covered on all things baseball every single day. It's just like Locked On Reds. It's free and available on all platforms, and it's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day, because you know that we will be Locked On Reds all throughout the offseason and every single day.